data providers or signal providers is much less than that. And you should get all of them. The problem has always been saturation on the flip side is like, how do I consume all this stuff? How do I operationalize it? And to your point, AI is a great like vehicle to be able to absorb all of this, find patterns. The thing that's like really been eye-opening for us is like
GTM AI podcast with Jonathan Austin, Coach K, where you get the latest with AI and GTM today. GTM.
Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, whoever is listening. This is Jonathan Carford, aka Coach K. This is the GTM AI podcast. I am pleased. I'm taking privilege and pleased and making a new word called pleased and privileged to have my man here, the CEO of Revic.ai, which I'm geeking out to ask you questions. So Hussain Al Shorafa, correct? I say it right?
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
There you go. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I'm like geeking on your background. So obviously you're a fellow member of Build-In like I am, which I love the community. You've been a sales leader for a long time. So like I love being able to talk to founders like yourself who have this rich background in sales, because like obviously you come from the trenches, you understand the pain. Nothing against technical based people. They're awesome. I love them so much, but it's just a different view with people who come from, sales background, which is awesome. So I'm really excited to dig into that. But before I get into that, I always like to have people and guests introduce themselves, and I always say the non-LinkedIn version. So tell me, like, what's your journey been like? How the heck do you get in this weird, crazy AI world we're in? And give me the scoop.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give a little bit of the LinkedIn, but not too much of it.
A little bit. Okay, a little bit of LinkedIn.
I started on the technical side. So like, that gives me kind of a little bit of a different tilt. And then I was like, one day I was this is going to date me. I was at the Lakers Trailblazers game 7 where Kobe flips up the ball to Shaq and he dunks it.
Oh, that's a good game.
Got
Jealous.
tickets. It was like this sales guy had given me the tickets and I was like, well, how do I get a job that I always do this? Got into the sales gig and then just kind of progressed through, SC all the way to the sales leader, sales specialist, sales leader, all that stuff in different facets, public companies, private companies.
It's cool.
All those stuff. Just like throughout the whole process, like just watched how hard sales is and how much crap we get from our own organizations when you're like, hey, look, man, I'm just mirroring what the market is telling me. And you just kind of see this. And so you see a lot of infighting internally because of it. Hey, it's not my opinion. This is what the market is saying or what have you. And so we kind of came to the conclusion like, hey, sales is hard enough as it is. Taking pot shots from inside the organization makes it infinitely harder. And the amount of incredible tools for all this stuff, data, all these things are like just complete, like overwhelming from the true sport of being in sales. And so we just, started this company to kind of to start to solve that problem. And so a couple of years ago, kicked off transition to starting the company, and we've been off to the races since.
So Revic's been around for a couple of years now already?
About a year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
Awesome.
So we did
That's amazing.
Thank you. We did our first round at the end of last year, and then we've just been cranking since.
Pre-seed? So is that, did you Series A or pre-seed?
It was a seed, like a larger seed. I mean,
Cool.
maybe not the crazy seeds that you're now seeing from a bunch of companies, but pretty close to that.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get discouraged if you're not one of these, seed companies of $100 bajillion and you're like, it's just, come on, guys. Like, I'm all about, if you can get, it's just my opinion because I'm more of a business mind profitability. I'm like, I want the lowest seed as much as I need to so I can just profitable as fast as I can. Or I don't need to have a seed anymore.
No, for sure. There's a couple of things that happen when you take that much money, the pressure that ratchets up quite a bit. And so you end up getting into a rational zone, or you start to hire and make investments that you probably wouldn't have made if you had a little bit more time and a little bit more rationalization.
Yeah, this VC world is a lot of fun. I love the relationships. I love our investors and that kind of stuff, but there is a different kind of pressure. When I talk to founders who bootstrap it all themselves because like they had an exit before and they use their own money to do it, like it's pressure, but not the same way. It's like pressure of providing for my family, which is still pressure. It's just make sure you're not like have the VCs down your throat all the time, but well, I'm curious. I'm going to ask you a non-AI question. Is this okay?
Yeah, sure.
So you brought up something about sales, which I totally can appreciate that. Coming from, I was in sales for 10 years and then I've been in enablement now, marketing obviously now for a year. But interesting enough, I remember feeling that same way, but now I'm on the other side of it. Not that I'm saying that salespeople are wrong. I think it's a very clear picture from one slice of the pie, not the entire pie itself. Because like, for example, when you have SDRs and marketing bring in certain types of people, then you have a very small slice of the pie. It's a very valid piece of pie, but it's not the entire pie. So then you go out to different events, or you hear, for example, I go talk to different places. And so I hear things from different organizations that sometimes are different. I hear it multiple times enough. I'm like, okay, what you're hearing is not invalid. It's just valid from this slice of the pie. There's this other slice of the pie that thinks this way, you know? How do you get people to come to the ground where you're saying sales is valid and whatever the heck the market's saying over here is, like, how do you balance that?
I think the thing that like, and this is kind of how we started to think about some of the problems we were solving, which is like everybody's got different contexts around the similar problems.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about, and I'll just pick a simple, if you think about ICP, you know, my last gig, I was head of sales, and it was just like, we could never get agreement on what is our ICP. And this is like a common problem. Everybody has it. It's the single most important thing. Like, where should we as an organization bet our dollars?
Where should
our
we go?
resources, our investments, all that stuff. And you start to, you know, so I used to think, you know, products in it, like, why would they ever consider this other market? This is where we're winning. I don't even understand, like, where this conversation, or, hey, marketing is like being short-sighted, or like just looking to pad the numbers. That's the frame of reference that I was working at. And then obviously now that I'm the founder CEO, like, I'm paying attention to the different dimensions a little bit closer, or I'm seeing the dimensions in a different way. So the other parts of the, and what you kind of start to realize is product's context is, hey, I've made a bunch of promises to VCs saying this is the TAM that we can go after, and I need evidence of that so that we can do the next raise. Right. And that TAM expansion creates complexity and difficulty for sales, right? Because sales now has to go figure out, how do I get that TAM expansion? A lot of times it's a recycle on the product market fit, right? That's the equation. Yeah. Marketing is basically in between. The thing that I think about marketing is like, they're in between these two worlds. Sales, I need this thing for the next 90 days or next 180 days. They have to think about the world, the context much longer than that. Yeah. And then they have to balance sales and product, which is a really delicate balance. Those two,
it's hard, man.
Generally don't like each other. So like, you're squeezed in the middle. Like, how do you do this? Yeah. It's really the context that each person comes in with. And that's one of the things that, like, you know, we recognize, like, we say to our customers, we come in with a very sales centric perspective. That's our point of view. That's not to diminish these others. If you want to make big long-term bets, that's out of scope, or a different way you need to think about the problems, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you mentioned before, and you can, obviously, if someone goes to your website, they can see this, but you mentioned before how I call it tribal knowledge, but you're calling it the sales. You said, what's the word you guys use? The sales.
Collective sales memory.
Thank you. Collective sales memory, which I love that. So is that tapping into conversations? Is it interviewing each rep? Like, how do you collect all that tribal knowledge in one place you can actually leverage it?
Yeah. So the way we think about it is like, so framing story, like, I just think about whenever I learned something, you know, way back when I was a rep, the pieces of information that I coveted the most was information from my peers. That was the most valuable. Like, how did we win this? Why did we win that? What happened there? What competitors are you seeing? Those are the golden nuggets of information that were really impactful for like my day to day. And the reality is, and we all know this, like, most of the sales organization turns every, you know, 3 years. You're basically almost a net new sales organization. And so if you think about it, like, most of the insight that I get is from my peers, and my peers are constantly changing. Well, that means a lot of tribal knowledge is walking out the door. And so what we set out to do was like, hey, how do we figure out how, when one rep learns something, every rep can consume it? And it doesn't really matter if it's a rep or anybody in the revenue ecosystem, any observation that we've learned, how do we make it, consume it, and make it actionable or reusable somewhere else? And here, the beauty of the go-to-market space over the last 10 years, 5-10 years, is this plethora of tools. Like, on one side, it's a negative, which is we have so many tools. On the plus side for us, there's so many dimensions of information that we can connect the dots across. So like, plugging into Salesforce, and we all know the pros and cons of Salesforce, plugging into Gong or Clary or whatever technologies organizations have. So much of our interactions with customers are now recorded that we can just now, you know, turn all those recordings, all the emails that have gone back and forth, anything that's been recorded somewhere in an instance, like a system of record, we can convert that into something that's consumable. Now, the hard part.
Do you tap into the emails and conversation stuff, or just the CRM?
Email, conversational intelligence, CRM, anything a customer has access to, we'll tap into. Even a data warehouse as a store of record that we can get access to. Yeah.
Love it. So then you're taking, like you mentioned before, that part of it's trying to get the, not necessarily research or prospecting, but it's trying to get context on accounts so that you can aim your salespeople. You're like obviously most expensive, and I would argue the most valuable resource you have, which is their time. So you have context on the account and you can aim them at the right account with the right context in the first place. So is that kind of a good way to do it? Is that
100%.
right?
100%. Yeah. Like
So
the
like,
goal is to like, you should have clarity as to like, these are accounts that I should go prosecute. So
yeah.
if you have a book of business that's 100 accounts or 500 accounts, that's a big territory. But even at the broader scale as an organization, like where should we invest our resources and being able to look at the addressable universe? Like we track 35 million companies. So like being able to like whittle that to, okay, this is a manageable size that makes our business plan or operating plan solvent. Can we figure out what that is? And then once we have a view on that, can we then create the market that we need in order to maximize our revenue?
How would you say then you compete? And I'm just curious because like I'm
Yeah.
asking because like these questions everyone is not planted. I'm generally asked because I'm a very curious person. How would you compare yourself against like ZoomInfo's, Clay's, like any data enrichment? What do you say differences?
I think that those technologies are particularly powerful in different ways. Like ZoomInfo for us would be a data source, which means
Yeah.
for us, we would look at, okay, once we get down to this is the account, well, who within this account should we reach out to and what context? Maybe they have some signal through their integrations with all the intent data providers, Bambora and all that stuff. Like maybe that's an indicator of timing. This is when we should reach out these accounts. But for us, we look at, let's scope out the world. The other thing, tools like Clay are really powerful, being able to integrate everything, but somebody has to inject ideas into it. What we're saying is like, we can actually extract your ideas from your own history in order to figure out where is there a higher degree of alpha or higher degree of conversion rates that we can identify to specific, or we can correlate to specific attributes. That's a whole bunch of fuzzy words, but maybe the thing that I think about this SDR we were talking to, and we were showing them, we were like, hey, this is a great account for you guys. And this is the use case you should talk to them about. And they're like, well, why? And we're like, well, like we have all this to explain why is the hardest part is like, hey, we have all this indicators of data that we're looking
All this
for, public
data.
data, your data, like we can give you here are all the references with agents. And so then I was like, well, why are you asking? They're like, actually, we just opened up an opportunity with exactly that use case in this account. And we're like, and we felt pretty good about it. We were high-fiving because we're like, that's exactly what we want. We want our model to be able to pick up all the different indicator signals, correlate against what's working in your organization, and then pick it out for every account. And so that's how we think about it.
So you're kind of like the melting pot between the data from emails, calls, whatever, or CRM, and then mixing that with the third-party signals. You become this amalgamous melting zone, you could say. So I'm gonna give you a theoretical. You tell me if I'm hearing you correctly. So it's almost like you're saying, okay, your last quarter closed won, closed loss. You know what you won, use cases, because you have that from the emails and the CRM and the conversation data. And then you say, okay, now if we take that information and we then understand from enrichment, like the size, the industry, the personas, all the other stuff that has to do with that, then you take that same thing and then you map it back to say, okay, if we look at the similar companies here and we have the third-party data, so we can start analyzing, here's the title, here's the persona, here's the industry, here's the use case. Now use the messaging from this use case you just won to this person over here, just happens automatically. Is that correct?
Yeah. I would even just, we go a step further, and we have to go a step further because like title to title, like mapping is what we've done forever. But if you go to any organization, like titles, a VP at a bank means nothing versus a VP at an insurance company. Like those aren't as interesting, but there's like more interesting indicators like, hey, you've been in a company for 2 years or a year and a half versus 16 years. Well, when you see that as a salesperson, there's a difference. And so one of the things that we can do with agentic capabilities or AI now is like we can inject all that context that you or I have in our minds of having been in the field for so long as things to look for, cues to look for, to start to map people. And so when we say, hey, this is a good account, we're not looking at the firmographic attributes. Who cares? We're looking at the strategic imperatives that come from that organization, the hiring profiles that they're putting out there, like the people that are landing in this organization to say, okay, these two organizations are very similar. So we saw that Equifax and TransUnion for our capabilities didn't look similar, even though you and I would believe they're similar. We found Equifax to be more similar to Intuit, and they behaviorally are much more similar to Intuit, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So being able to
that does.
decipher at that level, and then at the person level, some people will lean in, pretty heavily to new technology. Some people are wanted to see it bake out before they're going to invest their time, and so being able to decipher those things is what differentiates us from other approaches, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's totally fascinating. So how does, if I can ask, how does a rep experience this? Is it like data coming through Slack? Is it just in their Salesforce? Like, how do they know when to actually go pursue something because of whatever signal's coming up?
Yeah, we try to be wherever they are. That's our goal. So like inside of Salesforce, inside of Slack, inside of
Yeah,
email,
wherever.
like those are the various systems of actions that they have or records that they interact with. So that's what we try to be. And we try to like the first answer whenever you're like asking Revic, hey, what account should I work on? You're going to get a very simplistic answer where you're like, is this,
Whatever.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just gonna be like, this is the list. And it's almost, is this thing like on? Is this thing like smart or not smart? But in that
Right.
simplicity is like where you're like, okay, let me engage a little bit more. Well, what's the justification behind it? And you can interact with it and ask validation questions, or we'll give you like a rendering of here are all the reasons as to why this is a great account. And here are all the signals we're picking up, and here are the people. And this is why these people, and this is the value prop that we would suggest for these people. But yeah, generally it's within whatever
Cool.
tool stack that they're using. That's what we try to do.
So I'm curious. I'm going to ask more from a marketing point of view, because this is something I think about all the time. I'm saying, okay, as an example, if you had 1,000 calls over however many months, let's just say first calls, because everyone has more first calls than any other call, obviously.
Yeah.
Your ICP would be talking about a lot of whatever pains it has to do with your particular data set. So it's very rich of stuff. So from a marketing perspective, I don't know what's the themes, what's the patterns. Does it have anything to do with like company size or potential deal size or persona, whatever case it might be? It's like, I'm going to find that so I can figure out what are they saying about current tech stack that they're using that's not fitting what they're trying to get for, so I can find those little wedges and then be able to market on the other side so I can take more advantage of that and bring it in. Does that make sense? So is it being able to take that same data set, so it's not just an individual sales rep on your accounts, but it's kind of looking more holistic and saying, here's kind of a strategy for messaging across the company? Is that just the same category?
So it's funny you asked. We have a couple of customers that are asking us for like the classic marketing use cases, which is I want to send in mass, more volume based engagement.
Stuff.
The way we like this is just part and parcel of the technologies. Like as we are learning things at the speed that the organization, that shows up in a point of view on every account. And if marketing is like, hey, I want to hit 10,000 accounts, we'll go canvas. Hey, do you have any broad-based parameters? If not, we'll fill in the broad-based parameters, and then we'll do the active research for every account to have a point of view for engagement. One of the things that comes out that I think is particularly powerful for the marketing use case is that we actually define here are the top 3 use cases for every account, which allows a very curated set of engagement patterns for those accounts. You can start to group them. Hey, 5,000 of them or 2,000 of them have the same use case, either through us doing reconnaissance on that account or some other indicator that says this is the thing to go hit this organization. So it becomes like a really interesting way to engage.
Yeah,
The hard part is like finding depth, right? There's a million ways you can get some insight on an account. Is like, how deep can you get on this account in order to decipher patterns? And this is obviously where we've spent a lot of time, like the R&D our tech.
Yeah, it's one of those things where this world of the third party, second party, whatever party data is starting to meld a bit more, because it's not so much, it's more becoming sources. It's always a data source, but it's always becoming this world where you have this way of being able to, through an interface, through Claude or whatever, have all these connectors come in the back end and start chatting with your whatever data you want to look at. Let's just fast it, because you can start patterns that you wouldn't be able to see before. So on that vein, what are either patterns or, I don't know if metrics is the right word. Let's stick with patterns. Patterns you're finding that come up that you wouldn't have known unless you had the technology kind of start connecting the dots. What are you seeing that you find surprising?
It's a great question. So I think the point that you're making, which I think is really interesting, and it's true. I had a background in cybersecurity and saw a bunch of these cybersecurity companies, really advanced programs, decide, hey, threat intelligence, which is the way they would figure out somebody's trying to breach their company or whatever. They were like, some of these more advanced companies made the determination like, hey, I'm not going to license from one threat intelligence company. I'm going to license from all of them. because the cost of a security breach was too expensive. So they're like, hey, this doesn't make
Right.
sense for me to. And we think about
Right.
that same paradigm for our world. Like the value of a signal, like converting into a deal is so great, depending on your ISP, but like it's so valuable that the cost of these data providers or signal providers is much less than that. And you should get all of them. The problem has always been saturation on the flip side, is like, how do I consume all this stuff? How do I operationalize it?
Yeah.
And to your point, AI is a great like vehicle to be able to absorb all of this, find patterns.
Yeah.
The thing that's like really been eye-opening for us is like we find like some like intent data providers to be completely unbelievable for some customers and complete garbage for others.
Right.
You start to see this. Oh,
It's
now I
changed.
understand why there's these two worlds. And so you
Yeah.
start to see, and not to like, but you start to see how it's different for each organization, and like how we think that there's
Yeah.
all this like the playbook and it's how it's transferable from one organization to another. It isn't. There's too many variables for
Yeah.
that to be. The frameworks are transferable, but like the 90% or
It's specific
80%
tech.
is very specific. And so we see that. The other, so that's one thing. It's not like as specific as I think you're kind of asking, but it's just like a really interesting piece. And then, even on just like the playbooks work to an extent, but if you just think about like how many variables change from like when you're head, VP of sales or SCMO at one company to another, well, like the founding team is different. So the personality of the company is different.
Yeah.
Hey, what the emphasis was on engineering or sales or marketing. So then the composition and where's there the strongest talent is different, and the structure associated with it. So those are things, but like I will say maybe just one of the most valuable data sources is where people are hiring and how they describe things and how they layer in terminology into roles that you would be like, hey, well, that typically would be in this other role. And that's a big cue as to how they think about the world.
Yeah, that's cool. This whole subject around, again, not metrics, but like themes or patterns you find as a result of AI tech. Because again, there's a lot of, like with the team I work with, Momentum, and with other technologies I either play with or just experiment with. Everyone sees this, but like this world of hidden metrics, it's kind of like, I always talk about my Aura ring. Like it gives me metrics that were always there, but I never had a way to measure them, and now I can. But then having a way to take the data and then mix it with what was my emotional status at the time I had this particular blood pressure thing of whatever, like that world is like fascinating. Like when we start to mix different data sets together. In fact, this is kind of random and doesn't have to do with your tech, but like I had somebody tell me like they want to get to a world where they can use Apple Health stuff, like blood pressure and all this stuff, map to a sales call. So you see like, here at minute 22, and the guy asked you this really hard question, your blood pressure spiked and all this other stuff, because we don't have a way to track that now, but it'd be fascinating to see that those other data sets are absolutely relevant. You just never have connected the dots between, Just kind of
it's so spot on. Like, I think we'll also get to a place that B2C has always been in, which is like adjusting the message based on what we think that personality is. And maybe, the mood of you think about Netflix, like sometimes I'm pissed off and I want to watch like a action movie. Other times, like I want to zone out and I want to watch a reality TV where I don't have to think, and it has to understand, like their recommendation algorithm has to understand those are possible contexts that I'm coming in with. And so I think those are also true in B2B sales.
Totally.
Like you just have to B2B, revenue, right? So you have to be somewhat aware. I think there's some great technologies that we've been like, kind of paying attention to. We haven't done much with it, but like where they're watching sentiment as part of the, how body gestures, body language and gestures and all those things as part of the call recordings. And like, that's really interesting. And how can you correlate that to the personality of the salesperson plus the talk track? That's, I think, where we're heading here.
Yeah, the AI tech I first got trained on, the guy I told you about 5 years ago in my introduction, when I told you about before, his tech was literally a model he built on his own that literally was analyzing body language, tonal phrasing, all this stuff. And that was 5 years ago, and the tech was amazing. I'm like, holy frick, this is crazy. So it's, the world we're living in is just awesome. Well, tell me this, what I love to have is let you kind of dive in more to a practical use case, and obviously the customer story would be best. So don't tell me the customer name, so keep them anonymous. But is there a customer story of someone who used like the classic ZoomInfo stuff, whatever, they have that, came in, use your tech, and like, what was the results they had? What was some of the outcomes? Give me a specific story if you can share one.
Yeah, sure. There's a bunch of these early stories that we had where we have one customer that I'm thinking about. They had purchased 6sense, HE Insight, they had ZoomInfo, all these different
Tons of
technologies,
stuff.
and they had a
Yeah.
pretty good. They were like very advanced in adopting latest and greatest tech, and they also had a pretty advanced revenue operations team, probably one of the more advanced revenue operations team. And we
Yeah.
came in and we said, hey, 62% of the accounts you guys are pursuing are outside of your ICP. And literally their first response was
Yeah.
like, "Go pound sand." Like, there, you guys, like, you're like a percent company. Like, you guys just started. Like, how? And so, we had to dig out of that hole for a little while. And I think the moment there was
You call it baby ugly, man. Of course, that's for sure.
like this is actually the hardest part, is like you can synthesize so much more information so much more quickly that there's a little bit of a learning curve that has to happen, which we've gotten a little bit better at working through that. We're not great at it, but then we just started mapping it over time, and we started to map over time, like, here's how these technologies are guiding you, and here's what's reality for your organization. So we can't tell you that those technologies are not sound. They are actually valid and
Right.
sound, but for whatever reason, it's not working for you. So I don't know if it's an enablement issue or some execution issue. Well, I don't know what it is. We are not here to diagnose that. And so
We're not saying it exists. Well, to be honest with you, that's a big part of the hardest problem, is like knowing what the problem is to fix. Like the dissecting the problem, I think, is kind of easy. It's like really understanding where is the actual problem, because a lot of people identify a problem, but it's not the problem to solve. It's like a problem, be like, that's not it, So yeah, sorry.
I think that the thing that was like we were basically saying, hey, this is where your market is. And what does that actually solve? It solves multiple problems. And this is like one of the things that we keep kind of evangelizing, which is ICP is the single most important thing you got to go figure out. Because without that, you actually end up with a lot of marketing investments that go nowhere, or the marketing investment yields a lead and the lead goes nowhere, and then the opportunities and the conversion rates are nowhere. So then what happens? Pressure on marketing to go create more leads. And we need a higher pipeline coverage ratio. And we're in this dance. Or the worst case scenario, which people don't assume is the worst case scenario, but the worst case scenario is that deal progresses and becomes a closed one. What actually happens in that progression is now you've had to tap into engineering and go off to the left field to build the features and capabilities to address this customer. And then once it gets handed off to customer success, now they're spending all their time trying to like make this customer happy, and that customer will churn. And so all of this stuff is downstream from like ICP. And so this is why we ended up saying, hey, let's start at the beginning, which is like, what's ICP? What do people know ICP? And it turned out we didn't walk in thinking that this is the problem we're going to solve, but we saw this pretty consistently across all of our customers. So for this customer, the first 3, 4, 5 months, they were like, we don't believe you. We don't believe you. And we just kept showing them evidence that we were right. And towards we were getting nervous because like renewal time was coming, and we're like, I don't understand. Like, we're showing you the right things. And all of a sudden one day I was having dinner with a CRO and the head of RevOps. And in that dinner, he gets an email saying, we just lost this deal. And I pull up, Revic. And I was like, well, Revic's like saying you never had a chance to begin with. And he's like, what? He's like, where else is this true? And I was like, hey, you have about 40 million in pipeline where this is true. So the problem became much bigger, and they basically got it, have now flipped. All territory planning is based off of where the Revic assessment of what's their ICP, which accounts are addressable, all that stuff. So like really powerful. And today, 88% of their wins come out from those accounts that we're telling them they should go focus on. They still allocate these other accounts, and that is valid because you need time extension, you need like other investment areas. But over close to 60% of their losses are coming out from the accounts that we're saying don't spend time there.
Don't go after.
And I feel like it's a really interesting thing to, it's hard to give up parts of the world. I never could do as much as, no, we don't chase this. And then when a deal comes in, you're like, well, I'm going to just make this one exception. And with, it's so hard to be disciplined about that, but that's ultimately where we end up having to be.
So we're almost on time, but I got to ask you a question. So let's just tell you, like, I talk to startups all the time, right? So they find their kind of market fit. They're in the 3 to 5 million mark. They're trying to figure out like what's going on. They think they get it. And then like, for example, with the AI world, now it's like crossing, I was just at AI4 in Vegas. In that event, you had revenue leaders, and then you had IT leaders. And then in the middle is kind of like this AI ops new category, but it's basically IT and revenue, right?
Yeah.
So the people I talk to, same problem, way different personas. So like when you have the technology like yourself who can identify that, does it take that into consideration and saying, okay, just based on your conversations, you should go after RevOps. But then there's this whole world of IT that could serve the problem. But if we never talked to them, we would never have known that. So how does your tech understand like the other, for example, if you go after, if dentists for whatever reason was the thing I should be going after, how would the tech know that? So you could say, hey, you're going after SaaS, you should be going after dentists. Does that make sense? Even though we've never talked to a dentist. How does it understand that kind of stuff?
You're spot on. I think it's the conversation we started, which is like, hey, we're looking for cues about the person. Like we're not looking for like permanent attributes. We're looking for like qualitative attributes that allows us to infer, hey, this person and this person actually may look different, but they actually seem the same. And so that becomes interesting. Naturally, our models are going to lean towards the thing we see most frequently that's working and efficient, and that's where it's naturally going to bias. But we're looking again, you'll see it like, I saw it the other day. I was looking at, and I was not recommending the CRO to reach out to, and I was like, well, this is unusual. I was like, is this thing broke? That's like the first reaction. And then you dig in and you're like, oh, well, this person actually has been in the gig for 15 years, probably not going to be a change agent for us, and old school sales approach, that's not gonna work. So I think it's more the attributes and the qualitative analysis that we can now do with reasoning engines versus we couldn't do it when you do ML models. You have to give it specific features, all that stuff. So that's a little bit of a change. But candidly, I wouldn't say that we have a perfect answer there.
Yeah, I know it's not an easy answer because like you don't know what you don't have access to, but it's just this world because of, and I'm asking this all the time, mostly because like in the academy, obviously though it's the GTM Academy, the people inside there are telling me more about the processes inside of orgs, whether Fortune 500 or otherwise. And it usually comes down to some sort of CRO RevOps channel, or there's the obviously IT channel with bigger. And then you have this new world popping up, I'm seeing more, which is this AI ops, kind of like a amalgam between the two worlds, And I always find it fascinating because it's a changing target. You never know for AI, if you're an AI technology listening to this, which I know I have a lot of listeners here, like where do you go to focus the energy? Is it truly revenue or is it through IT? I guess it depends on the size of org too, but it's just something fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's different of the scope of the problem you're trying to solve. If I'm like Glean or Writer, I have a much broader remit that's possible for me. Maybe they'll make the argument that they bias a lot on content generation, but really their platforms are very horizontal. Like for us, we focus on revenue, and so our clear business stakeholder is.
So Revic told you that you're close to right?
But the thing that, we think of the world we're getting to with AI is like a lot of the tech side of it has gotten, I say this has gotten easier. And now it's like business logic. That's the most coveted thing. Give me the context that I can use to reason through the different problems. And so that's how we think about it, is like, how can we start to make it so easy that you can do fast turn experiments? So maybe coming back to your question, if you have a hypothesis on, hey, you know what, we sell to zookeepers, but tomorrow I think we want to try dentists. Well, let's just like that could be a new injection point into Revic and say, hey, we want to target this. Let's run an experiment. And can you help us like decipher that? All right, sure, no problem. And you want to get to that like fast turn, fast twitch things. And this is one of the things that's, you mentioned Clay before. One of the things that's interesting about Clay is go-to-market engineer is going to do all these fast twitch experiments. Well, we really think like all of this should be pushed all the way down to the person that's going to execute and is accountable to the number.
Yeah, I like that. One last question, and well, actually two. So one is making sure I have the website, right? Revic.ai. Where did you get the name Revic? That's my last question for you. How did Revic come up?
It's the driver behind it is revenue for the IC. So how do we help the IC deliver more? How do we help their lives? Yeah, that was.
I love it, man.
Inspiration there.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm not sure what comes, but now I'm like, that makes sense. Well, I'm like geeking out on this, man, because like now I'm like, I have so many more questions, but I'm to ask you afterwards. But I just want to say thank you for this. Like, it's nothing but a pleasure. Is there any way, are you okay if I attach your LinkedIn link to this? Okay, too?
Yeah,
okay.
That would be super helpful. Yeah, no, thanks for making the time for us, and really appreciate the questions.
My pleasure, dude. I'll make sure I'll blast it out, and we'll get everyone out the word out of you so you can make sure to chase the right people.
Awesome. Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.
Tune in now, don't delay. Catch the future on display. In a world of tech and code, breaking